Hey there folks, we're back with another smashing video, and today we'll be talking about one of the most popular mythic characters overall, vampires. Fortunately for us, this will not be a Twilight crossover. Rather, we'll be talking about some of the most bloodthirsty vampire characters from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Contrary to what people might think, vampires form an important part of the Marvel comics, and have repeatedly proved their worth as villains. We've seen glimpses of vampires over the years, in many different comics as well as in some of the live actions. For example, She-Hulk Attorney at Law shows a small scene of a vampire, and a lot of fans speculate it was indeed Blade's voice in the post-credit scene in Eternals. For what it's worth, vampires might soon make their entry as the official antagonist in the upcoming Marvel movie. Shh, you didn't hear that from us. And we're here to give you a backstory on the vampire lore in the MCU. Sit tight, and don't let the pesky buggers bite. Before we get into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Varnae. Varnae is the first official vampire to have debuted in the Marvel Comics, and it's interesting to note that he was not bitten and turned like most vampires are, nor was he born as a vampire. Varnae was a human, although a different race of humans, called Gigantopithecus, and he was turned into a vampire after mythic sorcerers cast a terrifying dark spell to kill an all-powerful King Kull, who had defeated his nemesis known as Thulsa Doom. Unfortunately, the spell had backfired and created an evil creature that thirsted after blood and could never see the sun, Varnae. The sorcerers who created Varnae also attempted to control him, but this was also an epic fail. This is because Varnae proved to be an uncontrollable entity, who in turn killed the sorcerers, and then raised them from the dead to serve him. Hence, Marvel's inaugural vampire horde was formed. It's alleged that Varnae was actually not just the only vampire who was created before the fall of Atlantis, but was the only one alive by the time of the event. Varnae then ran amok, and created countless vampires, and ruled over them as their king. In fact, he was even worshipped as a god. In 10,000 BC, Varnae led an attack by the undead on Conan, Zula, and Red Sonja, but was fended off with the same spell that had created him, but only temporarily. This was until he was forced to go on a rather unpleasant underground hibernation, because of the great cataclysm that made Atlantis fall. Among the vampires Varnae had created, Lamia was a powerful priestess who followed him and had slaughtered countless people in his name. She believed that one day Varnae would return, and she would be exalted for her unshakable belief in him. Like most vampires, Varnae possessed a lot of powers that were specific only to vampires. However, the intensity of his powers was comparable maybe only to Dracula, and no other vampire. Some of these were vampirism, the ability to turn others into vampires, superhuman strength and stamina, superhuman speed and agility and movement, immortality, regenerative abilities, and so on. However, you can't just have strengths without having weaknesses, and Varnae was unfortunately susceptible to sunlight, religious icons, impalement, silver, and beheading. Moreover, his thirst for blood could also be seen as a weakness, since it is known that vampires lose their strength when they do not feed on blood. Here's something about Varnae you probably had no idea about. He was the first owner of the Book of Vishanti. Dracula. The infamous Count Dracula is nothing short of a legend in the world of vampires. However, did you know that he was created by Varnae to be his successor? This is probably why Dracula was the closest to Varnae in terms of powers, and no other vampire has since been able to become as mighty as either of them. This also definitively shows that Varnae was the motherlode for all vampires in the Marvel Universe. Dracula was born as Vlad Tepes in Transylvania, in the kingdom of Wallachia. There's a rich history of his childhood years and his war against the Ottoman rulers. The Ottoman Empire pretty much ruled all of Eurasia at the time. He had failed to conquer the Ottomans and was consequently taken under their wing to be a vassal ruler. He was also married off to Zofia and had a daughter named Lilith. Dun dun dun! However, he abandoned them both later and then married his true love Maria, and led one final battle against the Turks after getting visions. This act was actually a move by none other than Varnae, who saw in Dracula the potential to be his successor. He was bitterly defeated and left to die, but turned into a vampire by a Romani healer named Leonda, who was a vampire herself. This transformation was not a consensual one, and Vlad set off to defeat the Romani in turn. Remember Lilith, Vlad's daughter with Zofia? Well, she was then turned into a vampire using spells by the woman whose care she was under, and more so, she was made immune to most vampiric weaknesses. This meant that the girl who grew up hating her father would be a troublesome prick to him for all of his immortal life. Varnae had now waited enough, and had empowered his servant Nimrod to fight against Vlad, who easily overpowered him and proved himself to be Varnae's successor. Once Vlad drank Varnae's blood, he officially became the #1 bloodthirsty menace in the Marvel Marvel Universe. A slight derailment from Dracula here, Varnae actually grew quite bored of eternal life, and after having picked a successor to carry out his bloody goal of vampiric domination of the world, he seemingly committed suicide by walking into broad daylight, allowing himself to be turned to ashes. Now it was Dracula's time to shine, and shine he did. He went on to become one of the most feared antagonists in many issues of the comics, and even came face to face with Doctor Strange, who finally killed him.
The world no longer needs a hero. What it needs.
Blade, born from a human mother who was bitten by a vampire when she was pregnant. Eric Brooks, better known as Blade, is one of the most prolific vampire hunters in the history of Marvel. Nicknamed the Daywalker because of his power to stand against the sun, he otherwise possesses vampiric attributes. It all began when a vampire known as Deacon Frost attacked Blade's mother when she was in labor, rippling off a series of events where she would give birth to a half-human, half-vampire child. Blade's life as a vampire hunter began when he encountered the vampire who had attacked his mother all those years ago, and he was taken under the wing of a formidable vampire hunter named Jamal Afari. Dracula makes appearances throughout parts of Blade's life, as their battles take them to different parts of Europe. The Dracula of Blade's time was not the novice bloodsucker who just wanted to defeat the Ottomans. This Dracula was none other than a legendary vampire lord, who was seemingly all-powerful, and had even bitten Blade on certain occasions. However, the unique characteristics of Blade's birth had given him full protection from the weaknesses of vampires time and again. Blade had formed the Night Stalkers alongside Hannibal King. Don't worry, we get to talk about him too. And Frank Drake, and the team took on the antagonistic supernatural creatures that proved to be a threat to the world. Later on, the team also allied with none other than the Sorcerer Supreme. Doctor Strange, folks, it's really not that hard to keep up. And Ghost Rider. Blade's journey took him to various places and eras, and he aided the MI-13 in the aftermath of the Skrull invasion. He also sided with the X-Men during the mutant versus vampire conflict, most notably in the reality-altering events of Heroes Reborn. Blade fought alongside Captain America as well, facing off against the eldritch entity Adana. This showed him embracing his vampiric traits in order to truly defeat Adana, something that Blade had rarely done before. The most fascinating fact about Blade is his dhampir nature, since he's a vampire-human hybrid, for lack of a better term. He'd also drunk the blood of Dracula, which had given him more access to unlocking his vampiric potential. When all said and done, Blade still does possess some weaknesses, as he is a vampire after all. He needs access to fresh blood to be able to live, and access his full strength. Moreover, he was not immune to red light, as he was to sunlight, which could burn his skin and kill him with longer exposure. Michael Morbius. Marvel really has a diverse set of character backgrounds, because we see how a curious scientist later turned into a terrifying bloodsucker, just while he was trying to find a cure for his disease. Michael Morbius was a brilliant scientist who, unfortunately, had a rare blood disease. In order to find a cure for his ailment, he rushed an experiment that involved vampire bats and electricity. This delightfully dark combination made him into a vampire. But hey, at least it made him immune to the blood disease. Small victories. Michael Morbius thus unwittingly and unintentionally became a vampire, and hated most aspects of it, most notably the need to consume fresh blood to sustain himself. Due to the nature of his transformation into a vampire from a human, he was ostracized by both humans as well as by fellow vampires. He mostly found solace with other monsters, and well, that's a good villain origin story in itself. However, good scientist Michael Morbius did not turn into a villain. Rather, he mostly became a vigilante. His main dilemma is explored very tactfully in the comics, since he struggles with his bloodlust and at the same time works very hard to find a cure for his vampirism. Michael Morbius had come face to face many a time with our friendly neighborhood masked hero, most notably during the time when Spider-Man had grown 6 arms and was wondering how to undo this affliction. Really though, should Spider-Man have not seen this coming? He is a Spider-Man after all. After an altercation with the toothy scientist, Spider-Man realized that he could use Michael Morbius's blood to cure his condition, as well as that of Dr. Connors. The two decided to help each other, and as a result, tracked down the unwilling vampire and extracted some of his blood after a battle. Thankfully, Spider-Man lost his extra limbs, and Dr. Connors remained in his human state. It is interesting that during a certain fight with Spider-Man, the vampire was hit with a freak bolt of lightning, and for some unexplained reason, he turned back into a human. However, the transformation was only temporary, and he turned back into a vampire soon after. Michael Morbius is a bit of a misguided guy, because he can't really control his bloodlust and hunger, and then beats himself up about his unfortunate actions. Well, morally gray is a thing, even for vampires, I suppose. Zarus. One of the most well-known facts about Dracula, other than his literal toothiness of course, is that he had a slew of brides. Zarus was the son of Dracula, who was not the biggest fan of Daddy. He was unhappy with humans too, but he mainly disliked his father's leadership, and in an effort to overthrow Dracula, Zarus allied with many different supernatural sects: Claw, Charniputra, Mysticos, Atlantean, Nosferatu, Siren, and Moksha. The alliance proved its salt, and at a centennial meeting of all vampires, Zarus drove a stake through Dracula's heart and beheaded him. Zarus and his allies in the Mysticos sect then created devices that could cancel out the frequencies in visible light that were harmful to vampires. Zarus used these devices to create a more dominant place for vampires all around the world. Soon after declaring himself the Lord of Vampires, Zarus set his eyes on world domination. For this, he planned to convert every mutant in the city of San Francisco into vampires. This was to be carried out by first infecting Jubilee. We talk about her later too, to lure out her fellow X-Men. Wolverine became one of the first mutants to turn into a vampire, which was strange because his healing factor provided no resistance. Cyclops was then forced to meet with Zarus and tell him flat how unreasonable this plan was. And finally, the X-Men together decimated Zarus' army in front of him. It was revealed that Wolverine's healing factor had been turned off, which is why there was no resistance for him turning into a vampire. Oh, and they also resurrected Dracula, who did his son a return favor by cutting his head off. Zarus was, however, later resurrected again, and together with Dracula, he planned to start the vampire kingdom from scratch. This time, he assumed the identity of Shadow Colonel, a supposedly dissident vampire who wanted to rule the vampires differently than Dracula did. During this time, Zarus ran into our favorite vampire hunter Blade and was almost killed. Blade had beheaded him, but Zarus and Dracula's allies had taken him back to Chernobyl, where Dracula aimed to establish his new kingdom, and Zarus was eventually reattached. Zarus had powers similar to most vampires, but special notes should be made of his mastery in sorcery, mind reading and controlling, as well as weather manipulation. While the second two are yet to be fully explored in Marvel, we can say with some degree of confidence that being Dracula's son is probably what gave him these extra powers. Baron Blood. John Falsworth, born as the son of a British aristocrat before the First World War, eventually turned into one of Marvel's most well-known vampires, Baron Blood. He left their home estate when his brother was given the lordship of the land, along with the inheritance, and traveled to Romania, where he fell prey to Dracula's hypnotism, and finally became a vampire. Dracula sent him back to England to wreak havoc all over the country, since England had seemingly repulsed him earlier. In Bram Stoker's legendary novel, Falsworth was highly intent on destroying England, and during the First World War, he offered his services to the German powers, who named him Baron Blood. He even became the great weapon of the German forces in the last few months of the war. Union Jack, who was actually Falsworth's brother, Montgomery, finally injured him and forced him to leave England. He then followed Hitler's rise to power closely, felt a strong bond with the dictator's ideals, and decided to help him. Come to the Second World War, Falsworth again offered his services to the Nazis, who, after performing a slew of painful experiments on him, made him somewhat immune to direct sunlight. He then resumed his course to terrorize England. He returned to his family home, posing as his own son, but was later discovered by his brother, the original Union Jack, after he almost bit his niece, who later moved on to become another vampire named Spitfire. He was again defeated by the Allied forces, known as the Invaders, but resurrected a second time by the Axis agents. Towards the end of the war, Falsworth left the Nazis and traveled to the USA with Dracula to find a way to permanently rid the vampires of their weaknesses, but were stopped by Captain America and Bucky Barnes. Baron Blood had a few more encounters with Captain America after this, and he was last found by S.H.I.E.L.D., floating in outer space. Baron Blood was resistant to sunlight and could mentally manipulate animals. He could also manipulate the weather to a considerable degree, and could shoot knockout gas from his nostrils. Hannibal King. Born and raised in Milwaukee, Hannibal King worked as a talented private investigator. While working on a case in London, he was bitten by the vampire Deacon King, the same guy who killed Blade's mother, and became a vampire himself. However, King was repulsed by his newfound transformation and vowed to never harm humans or even drink from a human. He would only drink from blood bags found at blood banks, and even continued his career as a PI. Although he could now only work at night, King came face to face with none other than Dracula, during an instance where he was investigating the death of a client's husband in his London office. While at a bar, he was attacked by a vampire, and the trail led him straight to Dracula and his underlings, who were in the middle of plotting something. King shot at Dracula, but the bullet hit his servant O'Brien instead. Dracula kicked King out of a two-story window and then fled. He was again tracked down by King, and they almost had a one-off, but Dracula fled again. However, King was able to sort out the case with his client, since it was revealed that Dracula had killed her husband. It's interesting to note that the first time King fought Blade, he defeated the latter quite easily. They later turned into allies, as Deacon Frost was their mutual enemy. Their altercations with Frost again brought them to Dracula's vicinity. Blade, Frank Drake, and Hannibal King fought a final battle where they cast the Montesi formula, killing off all the vampires around them. Technically, King should have died too, but the fact that he never consumed blood directly from a human came to his favor. He was, however, returned to his normal human state instead. King, Blade, and Drake Frost then formed the Night Stalkers to keep an eye on threatening supernatural activity. They fought the Darkholders with Doctor Strange, as well as also battling other forces such as Hydra's Department of Occult Armaments. Over time, the effect of the Montassi formula started weakening in King, which rifted his alliance with Blade. Blade later staked Hannibal King, but he later returned to life with all the vampires killed by Blade. Hannibal was then granted a drink that would make him less dependent on blood. Deacon Frost. Deacon Frost was also a scientist, much like Michael Morbius, though he was looking for a cure for death altogether. In his attempt to seek immortality, he accidentally injected vampire blood into his body and became a vampire. However, since he did not become a vampire with the usual means, he was gifted with quite the pesky ability. Any vampire born from him would generate a doppelganger. By biting each doppelganger, he could create countless doppelgangers, and they would all be under his mental control. Neat! Posing as a doctor, Deacon Frost feasted on the blood of Tara, Blade's mother, while she was in labor. This passed on a series of vampiric enzymes to the still unborn Blade, who became a Dhampir, a half-man, half-vampire. However, Frost could not kill the child on time, leading to Eric Brooks growing up and assuming the identity of Blade. Frost had also turned Hannibal King into a vampire, as just mentioned. Deacon Frost actually set his eyes on becoming the Lord of Vampires, using his doppelganger ability, a position that was being held by Dracula himself. Hannibal King and Blade were initially distrustful of each other, but their mutual hatred for Frost made them unlikely allies. King and Blade's doppelganger infiltrate a party held by Dracula, where the doppelganger attempts to kill the Count, but is easily overpowered since he doesn't have the original Blade's skills. Despite his lofty ambitions and impressive vampire ability, Deacon Frost is a bit of a letdown when it comes to other vampires, especially the ones created by him. The comics mention him being revived and killed off a couple of times, then finally being killed for good. Bloodline. Bloodline, aka Brielle Brooks, is none other than the child of Blade and Saffron Calder. She was born a Dhampir just like her father. However, at Blade's request, Doctor Strange cast a spell over her to ensure that no one could sense her through magic. When Blade returned to his original lifestyle, Brielle lived with her mother and had zero knowledge of her father or the fault in his bloodline. With the death of Doctor Strange, the spell cast on her began weaning off, and as a result, Blade returned to his daughter. Brielle then started training with her father, and joining him for missions as well. During this time, Doctor Strange came back to life, and his spell started protecting Brielle from being sensed by magic once again. Agatha Harkness once kidnapped Brielle's friend Jaden to catch her attention, as she was interested in Brielle's abilities. Brielle refused to join Agatha, which she respected, and gifted her a kitten called Walpurgis before parting ways. Dr. Voodoo also intercepted Jaden and Brielle, and asked the latter to join him. Despite her initial hesitation, Brielle later joined Voodoo along with Walpurgis. Brielle Brooks is a very young vampire in the Marvel Universe, and she has a lot to live up to. Considering her father's impressive history, it's left to be seen how Marvel further constructs her story, and how she carries on Blade's legacy or carves her own. Victor Strange. As the name suggests, Victor Strange is indeed related to Dr. Stephen Strange. He's the youngest brother of Donna and Stephen. When his mother and sister passed away, Stephen was unable to visit his father's deathbed out of grief, and was chided by his younger brother Victor for being emotionless. After their altercation, Victor was involved in a car accident, leaving his guilt-ridden older brother to place his dead body in a cryogenic state, hoping that the future would bring some remedy to bring him back to life. When he became a sorcerer, Stephen Strange tried different magical methods to bring his brother back to life. Unbeknownst to him, he had used the vampire verse on Victor, turning him into a seemingly bloodthirsty creature. When Victor woke up, he had very little recollection of his past life, and as a result, his vampiric abilities became a pawn for many people who had aims of their own. One such person was Marie Laveau, who even thwarted Doctor Strange's attempt to rescue Victor, and gave him the nickname Baron Blood, after the original Baron Blood. After a while, Victor was released from this servitude by Stephen and his allies, following which he tried to act like a hero, just like his brother Stephen. He also developed a relationship with Morgana Blessing. When the original Baron Blood, John Falsworth, returned, Victor assumed the identity of Chiron and started living life as a vigilante. He almost ended up killing innocent people and left Morgana Blessing when she pointed out the same. When Doctor Strange got wind of this, he fought with Victor. During the course of their fight, Victor realized his mistake and impaled himself on a wooden stake, apparently ending his life. He later returned to life but was trapped in a mirror dimension. A lot of fans speculate that Victor Strange might later become a part of the Avengers. While he has a lot of vampiric abilities, none of them are outstanding and he retains the usual vampiric weaknesses. This indicates that he might have to work quite a bit to prove himself worthy of being an ally to the Avengers. But since his vampiric transformation has been out of the ordinary, it remains to be seen how his story goes on. Vampire by Night. Nina Prince, aka Vampire by Night, has a very interesting backstory. Her maternal side of the family suffers from an ancient werewolf curse, and she herself was bitten by a vampire. As a result, she is somewhat of a vampire, a werewolf, and a human all at once. During the day, she's a normal human being, but at night she transforms into a vampire. However, if it's a full moon night, she becomes a werewolf. Kinda hard to keep up, isn't it? Nina uses her father's money and influence, who happens to be a very wealthy tycoon, to keep her abilities in check, and to make sure that she never accidentally hurts a human being. However, this badass vampire/werewolf has no conscience when it comes to harming the worst that society has to offer. Many times she feeds on and kills murderers, rapists, and the like. And honestly, we might all just be grateful for that. Her uncle is Jack Russell, werewolf by night, and together with him, she once falls into a trap set by S.H.I.E.L.D. and becomes a very unwilling member of the Howling Commandos. During her time there, she was once also partnered with the daughter of Dracula, Lilith. Bloodstorm. Aurora Monroe was just a pickpocket living on the streets of Egypt. Once, she had the unfortunate idea to pickpocket a man who turned out to be none other than Dracula himself. As a result, she was turned into a vampire by him, although she later was able to get out of his control and find her place among the X-Men. However, her bloodthirst got the better of her, and she killed both Beast and Professor X. She was approached by the Goblin Queen with a promise to tame her hunger, as long as she would help the latter. She thus joined the Hexmen, but quickly realized that the Goblin Queen's promises were nothing but folly. She was able to cast the Goblin Queen away with the help of a young Hank McCoy, but had no place to return to, since the Goblin Queen had transported her through time, until Cyclops offered her a place on the team. Cyclops and Bloodstorm developed feelings for each other over the course of time. While on a date, the two were attacked by Ahab and his hounds. In the fight, Bloodstorm was impaled by a silver stake, killing her, but not before Cyclops defeated Ahab, forcing him to retreat. It is revealed that Bloodstorm is not affected by natural sunlight, as she used to play softball with the other mutants out in the daylight. However, whether she makes her return is up to Marvel to decide. Spitfire. Remember Baron Blood and that niece of his? The daughter of the original Union Jack, who he almost killed by biting? Yeah, that girl turned out to be the heroine vampire Spitfire. Born Lady Jacqueline Falsworth, she was attacked once by her uncle, unknown to her however, and then again by an Axis agent. The Human Torch had attempted to save her by giving her some of his blood. As a result of Baron Blood's bite and the Human Torch's blood, she underwent some sort of reaction in her blood and had granted her superhuman speed and strength and other superhuman qualities. Later it was discovered that she already had latent mutations in her blood, which were activated by the events, giving her powers. Once she became aware of her heightened abilities, she assumed the title Spitfire and joined the Invaders. After the war, she married, had a son, and desired a quiet life. She started observing that her abilities were waning as she grew older. However, she later started realizing she was developing vampiric abilities, but could keep her bloodthirst under control. She was also seemingly immune to sunlight. She joined MI-13 as part of England's response to the attack by the Skrull Empire. She openly revealed her vampiric self when she used her fangs in battle. She also met and began a relationship with Blade, to whom she proved she was able to keep her hunger under control. For a while, she was controlled by Dracula, but it turned out she was acting as a double agent and was feeding information regarding the Count to Pete Wisdom. Jubilee. We've already mentioned this mutant when we talked about Zarus, the son of Dracula. Let's now take a look at her life. Jubilation Lee was born with a genetic mutation that allowed her to generate explosive electric blasts, which could be compared to fireworks. She spent her early life in Beverly Hills and then followed the X-Men down to their base in Australia, managing to stay hidden for a while. When the X-Men were attacked, she rescued Wolverine, and as a result, formed a teacher-pupil relationship with him, and soon became part of the X-Men as well. When Zarus had planned to turn the X-Men into vampires, he wanted to start out with Wolverine, and he and Jubilee were the first and only people he was able to turn, thanks to the contingency plan Cyclops had made, which reverted Wolverine back to his original state. However, Jubilee continued being a vampire and struggled with her hunger for blood. Wolverine helped control some of this by providing her with samples of his blood, which had his healing factor. Nevertheless, Jubilee returned to her life as a mutant and even adopted a kid named Shogo. She established herself at the Jean Grey School. Her acquaintance with Quentin Quire helped her get rid of her vampirism, but retain her mutant abilities. Forgiven. Rather than a single member, Forgiven was a team of vampires led by Japanese vampire Raizo Kodo. The group offered help to Dracula when his namesake castle in Romania was under the control of a Null-possessed Hulk. Although the Forgiven were initially imprisoned, they broke out and arrived in Romania to beat the Hulk, but were beaten themselves. When Raizo himself and Red She-Hulk, actually a Forgiven member known as Inca, arrived at the scene, they were finally able to stop Hulk and get the Null possession out of his system. The Forgiven had an interaction with Jubilee where they had asked for her help in curbing their bloodthirst. Fans speculate that the Forgiven will play a much bigger role in the upcoming issues and movies, so it remains to be seen how they and Raizo navigate the world as vampires. For now, it's also unknown where they stand, since they had allied themselves with Dracula and at the same time had also sought the help of Jubilee. Marvelous verdict. That was a truly exhaustive list. While most of the vampires in Marvel are positively bloodthirsty, others at least attempt to control their natural hunger through various means. It remains to be seen whether the original vampires, such as Varnae and Dracula, ever make their debut in the MCU. And boy, is it gonna be absolutely glorious if they do. Meanwhile, there are characters such as Jubilee, Bloodstorm, and Blade, who have already featured in movies and will probably get more limelight soon. Blade in particular seems to be getting more attention, especially after the release of Eternals. Well folks, that's it for today. Let us know which other characters you'd like us to cover. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone!